Okay, the key to block chords in the style of pianist George Shearing is whenever the melody is on a note in the chord, you play the chord and the rest of the notes. And so if we're playing Lavender's Blue in D flat, and so we'll make a D flat chord with the added 6 for the style we've decided to go in. Except we want our melody to be on top, so we'll fill in the chord down here, or spelled it in a different order. The root, the third, the fifth, and the sixth. And so our first two notes would be like this. The next note is also in the chord, and so we would also just fill in the rest of the notes of that chord. And now it's time for that scale run down where every other note will be in the chord and every other note will not. And so for those chords, we fill in what we call a fully diminished chord. And so that's, here it'll look like an A chord. It'll sound like that ultimately. But instead of A major, we'll make it a minor third and a diminished fifth. So the third is lowered and the fifth is lowered. And we'll fill in the empty space with a diminished seventh. And this is typically the chord you want to use anytime a damsel is getting tied to the train tracks. And the thing about it is that it's slippery. My music theory teacher called it a magic door because it's symmetrical. There's no way to tell which one is the main one, which note is the root. And so it's nice for getting from one place to another. And because of that, it also lends itself well to sliding up chromatically. And then, so what we're going to do is alternate back and forth between the chord that's the harmony and whatever fully diminished seventh chord follows naturally downward from that note in the melody. And so we'll start off with, and then back to the chord tone, back to diminished, back to the chord tone. And then the chord changes. The melody note stays the same, but we've got the new chord that changes. And then we go up to another chord tone. All right, the next thing to consider is a voicing that we call close position, where all the notes are as close together as possible. But you might want to play with dropping any of them down by an octave, and we normally talk about this in terms of counting from the top note down. And so you might want to consider what we call a drop two voicing. And so we take not the top note, but the second from the top note and move it down. So instead of, also, since saxophone sections typically have 5 notes, you might want to also double the melody note at an octave in a drop 2, double the octave voicing. Drop 3, drop 2 and 3, drop 2 and 4 are also common. I won't enumerate those, but just counting from the top, we're talking about taking any of these notes down an octave to make more space and maybe doubling the melody note. I have a hunch that close voicing is going to work the best for you. Finally, I'm going to suggest that you try to find ways to change the harmonic rhythm, change the chord, even if it's slightly, twice as often as we've been doing. So we've been doing da, 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 and then a new chord. Start with this D flat, add 6 chord, and then go for a D flat dominant 7th chord, D flat 7. It introduces this tritone that wants to resolve, and it just makes us lean into that next chord. And so our final example would be something like this, as slowly as I can do it and hopefully not mess up too much. I'll change to a 7th chord. Now here might come my diminished chords. A new chord. And here, since there was a moment of repose, I played with the idea of changing a chord on that last note, but I don't think you want to be as chromatically charged at that case. This is a point where punctuation happens, so I'm going to cut it off at about 6 minutes.